Hey everyone, how's it going? Back doing another video this week, and this week I wanted to chat a little bit about how to build more muscle. We've touched on muscle a lot over in the various content that I put out on my blog and these videos, but in short, muscle is probably one of the best things you can do to change your body, to improve your health, fitness, everything pretty much. Anything you want to do, muscle is going to help, especially if your goal, which I think everyone's goal is to live longer. Muscle is a great way to fight off all the diseases of longevity that we know of. It's been associated with improvements in everything from cardiovascular health to mental health to blood sugar, metabolic syndrome, all these chronic diseases that people end up having as they get older. So muscle is quite important. And your optimal window to build muscle is quite small in comparison to your life. The older you get, the harder it is. So the earlier you start, the better. But it's never too late to start either. I don't care if you're 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old, 80-year-old. You can still build muscle at any age. It's just easier when you're younger. You want to add as much as you possibly can with the time you have. That way, you don't need to worry about having to try and add a whole bunch and play catch up later on. Anyways, in order to add muscle to your body, you need to strength train or do resistance training, right? And it's an unfortunate truth. I know that some people are adverse to strength training or resistance training, but it's just a requirement in order to add muscle. Now, there's lots of different ways to do resistance training. There's lots of different modalities. All of them are equally valid for building muscle. There's no one that's incredibly superior to the other because honestly, the most important thing is that you're strength training. It's not that the modality that you do is better, whether you're barbells or dumbbells or kettlebells or body weight or resistance bands or TRX or whatever, or a suspension trainer. There's all different kinds of ways to add muscle. You just have to find the modality that you like the best or is the one that you're most likely to do consistently. But the important thing, no matter what modality you choose, is that you actually need to challenge your muscles enough to send them the signal to grow, right? And a lot of technical research or people online might talk about a certain percentage of your 1 rep max in order to optimally build muscle, right? And that's all well and good, but that's certainly not ideal for conveying to the average person. How do they know if they're working hard enough to build muscle, right? Because that's essentially what we want to do is just do the minimal amount of work in order to elicit the change that we're after. Right? And we want to avoid any kind of potential injury risk, right? Because if you're injured, you can't exercise. And if you can't exercise, you can't resist training, you can't build muscle anyway. So we want to convey the need to work hard enough, but also do it in a way that's safe and understandable for the average person, right? Because in order to do a certain percentage of your 1 rep maxes, and that's quite intimidating / risky for most people. So that's not necessarily applicable for everyone. So when I'm working with someone, I don't tell them to do a certain percentage of their 1 rep max. I don't think I've ever worked with someone where I've told them to do that. Instead, what I use is what's called an RPE scale or a rating of perceived exertion scale. And that's just basically a way of you identifying how hard you're actually working. And it just goes from 0 to 10, right? 0 being you're not really exerting anything at all. You're sitting around doing nothing. So that's the bottom end of the scale. And up to a 10 is you literally cannot lift this weight one more time or do one more rep or one more body weight squat. You're at complete and utter failure. And that would be maximal effort, right? So most people think that in order to get the biggest gains possible, they need to be doing everything at an RPE 10, right? And there's some truth to that, right? Because once you get to that point where you can't do another rep, your muscle is at complete and utter failure, you've done enough work at that point. There's no arguing about that. The downside to that is it can be unsafe, which is something we just talked about. We want to avoid injury because then you can't exercise, which is the whole point of here where we're trying to exercise. So we want to avoid injury at all costs. And also it can really hinder your recovery and eat into other lifestyle factors, right? Going to absolute failure all the time is going to be quite painful. You're not going to be able to probably work that muscle the next day. You might not be able to work that muscle for an entire week or more. And that is not necessarily good for adding muscle either. Also can disrupt your sleep. It also can make you have weird cravings. It can do all kinds of different things that also negatively affect other aspects of your health, which we want to avoid either. So there's a time and place for certain people to maybe go all out to a 10 RPE. But again, not ever something I've ever told a client to do. And it should be done very rarely with extreme caution and with a lot of forethought and obviously reasons to do it too, because you don't have to go that hard in order to build muscle, turns out. The reason why your body ends up building muscle is because it's getting the signal that it's been challenged and it wants to adapt to this challenge, right? And really that challenge is due to the fact that you are recruited every last single muscle fiber in your muscle to actually lift the weight or do the body weight squat or whatever it is, right? It's really putting everything it has into that movement. And that sends a signal to your body like, okay, Ryan's going to do this again, hopefully in a couple of days. I want to be able to actually withstand this insult of lifting this weight. So I'm going to build more muscle in order to make this easier the next time Ryan does this. So it sends a signal for your body to elicit a change. In this case, the change is to add more muscle. And so the more muscle fibers you can recruit, the more likelihood that your body's going to get that signal and then elicit that change. And so generally what happens is, if we're talking about going back to this RPE scale, we generally find that happens between an RPE of 6 and 8, right? So you don't even have to go to a 9 or 10 to get there. You can go to an RPE of 8 and elicit and activate all the muscle fibers you have in that muscle. And that's enough to send the signal to your body. And so how do you think of what's an RPE 6 or an RPE 8 or an RPE 7? What does that actually mean? How do I know if I've actually gotten there yet? So another way to think about this is to think about how many more reps you could actually do, right? If you got to an RPE 6, for example, that might mean that you could do about 4 more reps, right? Before you reach an RPE 10 and couldn't do another one, right? If you got to an RPE 7, you could maybe do 3 more reps and before you got to an RPE 10 and couldn't do anything more. If you got an RPE 8, you could maybe do 2 more reps before you actually hit a complete failure. To know whether you got to that RPE is you can judge how many more reps you could maybe do, right? You don't need to officially explore that, but you can judge. I can maybe squeeze out 2 or 3 more reps here before I'm done. And you should know that. You should be able to get to that point and be like, this is getting close to failure here. I can maybe do 1 or 2 more, 3 more before I'm not able to do this exercise, this movement again. And this keeps you away from failure, keeps you away from injury. And it also allows you to auto-regulate your training on that day. Some days you might be feeling really good and you might be able to get 10 reps of a bench press at 100 pounds, right? Before you get to an RPE, say 7, right? But the next day or a week later, when you go and repeat that workout, for whatever reason, maybe your sleep was poor, you had a poor night's sleep because your kid woke up in the middle of the night, or your nutrition the day before wasn't so good, or just for some fluke reason, you're not as strong that day, you don't feel as strong that day, and you might only be able to get to an RP or get up to 7 reps before you get to an RPE 8, right? So it allows you to, and that's okay, right? That doesn't mean that you didn't do the work, you didn't get to the point where you needed to in order to build muscle. It just means that on that day, you just happened to, for a reason, not be as strong as you were last week. And that's okay. But the RPE scale allows you to auto-regulate that, right? So you're not stuck with this fixed rep range, because I completely realize that everyone's life is different and different factors influence strength on given days. And so you might not be as strong one week as you are the next week. And conversely, you might be more strong the next week, right? And so you can increase the weight or add more reps, et cetera, right? So it allows you to auto-regulate your training, just knowing the fact that you need to get to this RPE level between 6 and 8 in order to activate the most muscle fibers possible in order to send the signal to your body to build muscle. So the next factor to talk about is to know whether you should be at the bottom end of that scale, like an RPE 6 or 7, or a top end of that scale, or should be like a 7, 8, or even pushing to a 9 occasionally, right? So I'll give you some guidelines for that, right? Generally, the heavier the load that you're using, the lower on that RPE scale you can be, right? So because the heavy load also plays a role in activating those muscle fibers, right? So for example, you might be doing some type of squat, and you can use a fairly heavy load. Maybe you're squatting your body weight or more than your body weight, and that would be a heavy load, right? It also comes along with a lot more risk. So you want to stay closer away from failure because there's just more risk involved in that movement for most people. So sitting at a maybe RPE 6 for your heavy squats is a good idea because it keeps you with, further away from failure. The heavier load allows you to activate more muscle fibers to a greater degree, and you can stay safe while doing it. Whereas if I'm telling you to do a bicep curl or a pull-up or something like that, it's pretty safe for you to go to an RPE of 9 or 8 or even close to failure on some occasions, because it's pretty hard to injure yourself doing an isolation exercise. Not that a pull-up is an isolation exercise, but it's safer to go to failure or closer to failure for those types of loads, right? In the case of isolation exercises like a bicep curl or something, or tricep, or you're just working one or two very small muscles like your deltoids, like you're doing some type of fly or raise or lateral raise or something like that, you're working smaller muscles, the closer you go to absolute failure, the better there, because you're typically not using a heavy load, and you can safely go to failure for those exercises. The other thing to consider here is you can, if you want, use lighter loads for even bigger compound exercises, quote unquote compound exercises, like your squats, like your bench press, like your deadlifts, etc. But you're going to have to really go to very close to failure for those, because you're not using a heavy load. So it's completely fine to use lighter loads for even compound exercises that are using more than one muscle group, but you're going to have to really make sure that you go closer to failure. So you're going to want to stay towards that 8 RPE scale for those if you're using a lighter load. So that's the lowdown on how to build muscle. You really just have to get to the point where you're getting somewhat close to failure, meaning you're going to activate enough muscle fibers to send that signal to the body to add muscle. Now, does this guarantee that you're going to add muscle? No, it does not, right? You can be completely perfect with your RPE ratings and nail it all the time and activate all your muscle fibers, but you still might not build muscle for a ton of muscle if your nutrition is garbage, if your sleep is bad, or if you have uncontrolled stress, right? All these other lifestyle factors play an important role in building muscle. But when it comes to the actual exercise piece of it, this RPE scale is really staying within that 6 to 8 range of RPE. It's really the sweet spot, it seems like, for muscle growth. I hope you find that useful in your training. Also, give yourself some grace when doing this. It's going to take you a couple of weeks to dial in what an RPE 6 feels like, what an RPE 7 feels like, what an RPE 8 feels like on the program you're using. It also might feel, every time you start a new program, you might have to spend a week or two trying to dial that back in with new exercises and stuff like that you haven't done before. Like I said, don't be a slave to a certain rep range or a certain weight. It's all about how close you are coming to failure, and that might mean different rep ranges and different weights on different weeks, depending on a lot of different factors. All those things out. Let me know how it goes. Leave comments, questions, insights that you might have in the comments below. Feel free to reach out to me. And if you need help dialing in this exercise piece in order to add muscle, or the nutrition piece, or the sleep piece, or whatever it might be, whatever you might be struggling with, I do have a couple of one-on-one spots open. So please reach out if you are interested in one-on-one coaching so we can work together to help you reach your goals. The best way to get started with that is actually to go to my website at rjbhealth.coach, click on the schedule discovery call button on the homepage and fill out the form, and I can get back to you about that. But you can message me directly, send me an email. I'm very easy to find if you don't want to do that either. And we can chat more about that. But if you are interested in other content related to building muscle or anything else related to reaching your goals, I do have a weekly newsletter where I send out all this information. You can sign up for that again at my website, rjbhealth.coach. Click on the newsletter button right at the top and fill out that form, which is just your email address, and jump on a newsletter, and you'll get all this information delivered to your inbox on a weekly basis. With that, I hope everyone has a great week, and I'll chat to you.